I worked as a backup security guard at a private firm in Pennsylvania. It was 2005, and the company managed properties all over the state. I was often shuffled around to different towns depending on work and demand, and that's how I ended up taking a shift as the night watchman at the Whispering Pines Inn, which ended up being my last shift as a security guard. The night permanently altered my perception of reality. That night, I got a call that I was needed to cover a shift for one of the full-time guards. He unexpectedly refused to show up for his shift, and there was no one for that night. That should have been my warning to not take the job. The property I was assigned to was a long drive from my apartment in the Poconos, at a large, historic hotel called the Whispering Pines Inn. The property had a small security kiosk at the front of the gate to the hotel that I was supposed to stay at until the next morning. Another guard would take over for the day shift. As I opened the door, the air was crisply chilling that night, and the ground was coated in freshly fallen autumn leaves. The moon hung high, illuminating the night as I got in my car. After a long and quiet drive, I knew I had arrived when I saw the ornate stone sign along the side of the road. It had the name of the hotel carefully chiseled into the rock. The security kiosk was just beyond the sign, adjacent to the driveway that led up to the old hotel. The Whispering Pines Inn stood there, with an imposing, menacing look. The towering stone structure was at least 4 or 5 stories high, but seemed much taller from where I was standing. It was nestled into the side of one of the Poconos' many mountains, gazing down onto the serpentine driveway. I could see the small windows of hotel rooms with the lights on, glowing yellow in contrast to the sharp white light of the moon. I pulled out my key card to unlock the small blue security kiosk. The door handle beeping as the latch clicked. I finished my hand along the wall next to the door and clicked on the light. I fished my hand along the wall next to the door and clicked on the light. A small desk with an old computer and 2 monitors faced away from the window that pointed towards the driveway to the hotel. I sat down in the old office chair in front of the desk and booted up the ancient computer. The computer roared to life, and the old CRT monitors flickered as they turned on. One of the monitors gave a direct feed to the hotel's security cameras, while the other was for the computer itself. The security camera feed switched automatically between multiple cameras around the hotel. The security was older, and it only gave out grainy footage in black and white. The first camera gave a view of the parking area outside, what I assumed to be the lobby. There wasn't much to see, aside from the lights glowing out of the lobby windows and leaves scattered around the pavement. Next, it switched to a picture inside the lobby itself, which from the grainy pictures seemed rather beautifully decorated with fancy carpets and Victorian furniture. There was a man in a black suit standing behind the desk, staring down at a stack of papers, intensely working. The feed switched again, this time to a long narrow hallway. The feed switched again, this time to a long, narrow hallway, opulent wall sconces glimmering brightly in the grainy camera footage as several very well-dressed hotel guests walked by the camera. Again, it switched. This time to a view of an impressive ballroom, filled with people dancing over a parquet floor in a rather austere yet graceful manner. The men were dressed in what looked like tuxedos, with the women wearing long, ornamented gowns. Once again, the monitor switched to a different image, but this time, it was a camera back outside, pointed away from what looked like a back door facing a small, concrete patio, edged up against the blackness forest. There were two men standing there, intently talking to each other. They were standing close enough to the camera that I could almost read the expressions on their face. The one man, dressed in a comparatively plain plaid shirt with suspenders, had a frustrated, almost angry look on his face as he spoke to the other man as if they were arguing. The man he was speaking to was dressed like the men inside the ballroom, a slick black tuxedo with black shoes that reflected against the light in the camera's view. This man had an upset look on his face as he spoke. It almost looked as if he were nearly in tears as he listened to the other. Suddenly, the camera monitor looped back to the original view of the driveway outside the lobby. I got up from my chair and looked towards a dusty old coffee maker sitting on the countertop next to the desk. I opened up the mini fridge to find a can of frozen coffee. I made myself a pot and sat back down at the desk, getting ready for a long night of watching cameras cycle over until my shift was complete. When I sat back down and looked back at the monitor, it had cycled back around to the two men outside talking again. This time, the man in the suspenders was no longer in sight, but the man in the tuxedo was, laying on the ground, staring directly towards the camera as he sobbed uncontrollably. I edged back in my chair at the sudden and unexpected sight. It felt like he was staring directly at me and not just the camera. The feed continued to cycle until it again showed the man at the desk in the lobby. Rather than keenly sorting through paperwork like he had been before, he was now speaking to the man in the plaid shirt and suspenders. His arms were up in confusion as the plaid-shirted man seemed to squabble with him, banging his fist on the front desk. He pointed an irate index finger at the employee. As I quickly blinked, the video switched to the corridor lined with the hotel rooms. It appeared to be quiet until the hotel room door adjacent to the camera abruptly swung open and slammed against the wall. My heart sank as a woman in a flowing gown and dark hair who appeared to be drunk slumped out through the open door, clutching the handle as if she crashed to the ground. The grainy image shuddered and the feed cut out for a second, and when it came back, the woman had rolled over on the floor, crying as she stared back into the doorway of the room. I became concerned as I gazed over to the edge of the monitor where I saw the figure of a man emerge from within the hotel room. I quickly noticed it was the same man in the plaid shirt and suspenders that I had seen outside earlier. How had he gotten to this room so fast? He had a frustrated and angry look on his face as he grabbed the crying woman off the floor and pulled her back into the room. Instead of staying in the room with her, the man shut the door and stormed down the hall. At this point, I was on edge. I was supposed to be having a quiet night guarding the front gate at this hotel, and instead I seemed to be watching an unnerving domestic dispute unfold inside the hotel. When the camera switched back to the view of the ballroom, I was almost overjoyed by the sight of normalcy as the ballroom dancers twirled around the parquet floor as formally as they were before. That relief only lasted for a moment as I noticed a man in a tuxedo sitting in a chair near the bar with his head down, sobbing into a glass. Could it have been the same man in the tuxedo that I saw outside earlier? My question was soon answered as the man in the plaid shirt and suspenders entered the ballroom. He was holding something. The picture was grainy, but I clearly saw it. The sharp edge of an axe pointed to the ground as he held the large handle. The crowd of dancers paused and looked at the man. I was sweating, trembling at what I was seeing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Suddenly, the camera glitched out. The screen was covered in grain and digital errors as I tightly held the monitor with both hands, desperate to see what the man in the plaid shirt had planned. Then I got my answer. The feed came back to the ballroom again, except the guests weren't frolicking around the dance floor anymore. No, they were laying everywhere, soaked in blood, covered in axe wounds. The tuxedos were torn and the dresses were slashed by the sharp blade. I nearly fell out of my chair. I had to do something, anything. People had just been butchered at this hotel and all I could do was sit at this desk and watch it unfold on a computer monitor. I whipped out my cell phone and dialed 911, screamed at the operator that there had been a slaughter at the Whispering Pines Inn and that the killer seemed to still be on the loose. I checked my belt, ensuring that my pistol was still in its holster as I bolted out of the security kiosk and the driveway towards the hotel. I didn't even shut the door behind me as I ran. The moonlight still lit up the night sky like a lighthouse. I could barely catch my breath as I gazed up at the hotel while running up the driveway. No longer were the rooms of guests glowing with the ambient yellow light. The entire hotel had been plunged into darkness. I must have had a completely bewildered look upon my face as I finally reached the front door of the hotel. My perception of reality felt distorted as my eyes took in what they saw. The two windows on either side of the door were smashed open. The dark lobby hid behind the large, imposing front door. What I didn't expect to see was a large sheet of plywood. The door was boarded over, the plywood nailed tight with rusty, jagged nails that had been driven into the doorframe. Confused as all hell, I jumped through the shattered window into the lobby, head spinning. I expected to see a crimson of pool of blood pouring out from behind the desk, but instead I was met with the smell of must and mold. There was no blood. There was no front desk clerk. All that met my baffled gaze was old decrepit furniture, broken chairs with moldy cushions, ruined carpets with water dripping from the leaky ceiling. The once lavish wallpaper loosely hung off the wall. Water stains covered the bare wood of the floor. Despite my sudden daze, I recognized the ballroom standing just adjacent to the battered lobby. It too was dilapidated and devoid of well-dressed dancers I had seen on the camera. Not a single soul was there, except for me. I could not believe my eyes. This place that I had watched on the cameras all night was empty and abandoned. I stood there in the ballroom, shaking with fear. I was trembling wildly, sweating like crazy, and I could not make sense of what had just happened, and then I heard a creak from behind me. I tried with every inch of my being to not turn around to see what had made the dreadful noise, but my curiosity begged me to turn around. I only caught a glimpse of it before I passed out. A glimpse of the plaid shirt, illuminated by the moonlight, shining in through the broken windows. I thought I was about to die. I woke up wrapped in a blanket, sitting inside the front seat of a police car. The sun had risen and was reflecting onto the police car as I gently opened my eyes. A police officer walked over and she started speaking. "So you were the person who recorded a massacre here a few hours ago?" I tried to explain to her everything. All the guests curled up on the floor, drowning in their own blood, hacked to bits by a madman. I must have sounded equally mad as I told the story to her, as the entire time she gave me a look of disbelief and confusion. She spoke again. "You know this place has been abandoned for 24 years, right? There hasn't been any guests here in a long time." "But how can that be true, sir? We searched the entire property and found nothing. There's no evidence that anyone but you were out here last night," said the officer in a slightly irritated tone. I felt like I had blacked out and had a bad dream, and to be honest, I wish I had. An older man was standing next to the officer, and he had a look of fear on his face. He was wearing the same blue polo shirt that I was wearing. He introduced himself. "Son, I'm Franklin, the regular day security guard here. About the monitor in the security office. There's only one security camera on the property, and it's outside the old lobby looking at the parking lot. I don't know what you were seeing, but it could not have been the inside of that hotel," said the man. I had lost all interest in seeing this hotel anymore. After a bit more questioning, the police eventually took me home. I was beyond shaken, and I was in no state to drive. The first thing I did when I got home was call my boss. I quit that job just like the last night security guard did. My boss seemed to have a knowing yet disappointed tone in her voice when she let me quit. I did extensive research on the hotel, and I found out what had happened there. In 1975, the hotel hosted a grand gala ball. Many people were in attendance, including a man named Terrence Avery. According to the newspaper, he had discovered that his wife, Cynthia Avery, was cheating on him with another man named Richard Markham, who happened to own the hotel. That night, Terrence Avery confronted his wife at the hotel and killed her in the room before taking an axe and murdering the guests at the gala ball. 31 people were killed and many more injured before the police found Avery calmly sitting at the bar, coated in blood. He was arrested and executed for his crimes. Richard Markham shut the hotel down a few years later and was found hanging in his home. The newspaper article had a picture of Terrence Avery, and there he was with plaid shirt and suspenders. The date all this occurred? October 9th, 1975, which just so happened to be exactly 30 years earlier from the night I was security. A few years after my final shift, the building burned to the ground, leaving nothing behind but a collapsed pile of stone. Needless to say, I never went back there again.